want to thank your pastor for outing me as a cusser before I start. It was a minor cuss word. I said asphalt. So here's, I think that anybody in this room who wonders if we need to reach the next generation, you should attend a high school football game. Because for those of you that don't know, this is our last weekend before college football starts, and I know some of you are excited about that. In the state of Georgia where I live, we just started high school football season this past weekend. Until I got sick in 2020, I was a community high school girls basketball coach at our local high school. I coach girls because they will actually do what you ask them to do. And this past Friday night, I brought a video. I wanted you to see it. Our school is currently ranked number 7 in America, our football team. We have the number 1 quarterback in America who's going to Georgia, who just transferred in. We're a football factory. Don't hate, appreciate. And we played the number 3 team in America, St. Francis Catholic School out of Maryland. This was the crowd. This is a high school football game. And this was early in the first quarter when I took this video. Okay? Part of the reason I wanted you to see that is the mass of people there. Because here's what it reminds me as someone who believes in the next generation. If we think we are reaching teenagers with the gospel, we are sadly mistaken. Because there are so many students there who desperately need hope. And by the end of the game, my wife and I are surrounded by all of these young couples, many of whom had elementary age kids or middle school kids. And I'm 55, so I'm past mid-age, but middle-aged. But my wife and I, we go to observe. We love football, but we also just go to observe and actually just stalk people the whole time we're there. We just want to watch parents do their thing. And this is one of the things that we noticed. This happened a couple of times with young moms and moms, dads. If you're this parent, no hate at all. But we noticed that there was this, like an elementary age kid or a middle school kid would walk up and they would have their cell phone and they would say, "Mom or Dad, I'm going over here." And it was almost this idea where moms were going, "Okay, text me where you're going. Text me the first name, middle name, and last name of the people that you're going to be with. I need to know their blood type. I need to know their DNA sample. If you could airdrop that to me, that'd be amazing. And then text me when you're on your way home." Any parents in this room like that? It's hard for me to deal with that because when I was growing up, if I told my parents I was going somewhere, this is what I got back. Bye. Anybody else grow up in a house like that? It was literally like, bye. And it wasn't that my parents didn't care. It's just that things have changed. My dad's favorite game for us to play growing up was this game called Outside. And men, are you with me? When we would start getting on his nerves, he would just go play outside. And he would lock the door and we could not come back in. I even thought about this morning. John was so kind to give me a bottle of water. Do you guys realize how little water most of us drank growing up? Because when you were locked outside and you got thirsty, the only thing you could use was a water hose. Some of you in this room, your teeth are rotting out of your head because of drinking out of a water hose. Or the only other times I was thinking about the only other times I drank water was when it was mixed with sweet tea. When they invented powdered Gatorade, I am old enough to remember when that happened. Or does anybody any Kool-Aid fans in the house? You are looking, by the way, my freshman year at the University of Alabama, after I got hurt as a basketball player, I made extra money on the weekends. I would dress up as the Kool-Aid man and pass out Kool-Aid samples and scare little children. It was amazing. But this is where we sit this morning because there is this great chasm between generations of parents. Some of you have friends like this, especially those of you that have young children. Do any of you have that friend that always tells you, "Oh, we don't have any problem with our kids going to bed. They go to bed without a fuss." And you're like, "I Googled last night tranquilizers for children." Darts, I can remember growing up and my kids would go, we are so bored. And I would look at them and go, my parents didn't even know where I was from 1979 to 1986. Go play with a stick. You know, we just get to a place where there is a giant chasm between us. Someone has wisely said that parenting is like looking both ways before you cross the street and getting hit by an airplane. And that's where some of us sit this morning, because you understand the tension of what it means to be a mom and dad. And here's what's interesting. There are children and there are teenagers. You are sitting with your parents, and the thing that you haven't taken into consideration, and we miss this way too often, that while you're growing up, so is your mom and dad. While you're growing up as a middle school student, while you're growing up as a high school student, so are your parents. It's why I am unapologetically blatant about this. If you have parents, you need therapy. Because so many of us in this room were parented by moms and dads who were doing the very best that they could do. And here's the thing for those of us who are parents sitting in this room this morning. So are you. But none of us are getting it perfect. And none of us are getting it completely right. In fact, some of you are at this place as a parent this morning. You think about this all the time, that imaginary kids were so much easier to parent. Right? My wife, Kelly, and I were incredible parents when we were parenting our non-existent children hypothetically. And then we had kids. And for those of us that are older, if you are a grandparent in the room and you look at your children trying to parent their parent, and there's a part of you that has a sadistic laugh every time because you're like, revenge. And then there's another part of you that doesn't understand, because we love to throw this word into the stratosphere in our culture, that this idea of snowflakes, that there are parents who are soft and their children are soft. Despite what any of us in this room went through when you were your age, can we consider for just a second the things that you and I as moms and dads have journeyed with our children through just in the last several years? A pandemic. Some of you literally had to relearn math because everything went to online school. Not just a pandemic, but racial unrest. And not just racial unrest. It seems as if this next election cycle is going to be a piece of cake. Political unrest. To this degree. And keep in mind, moms and dads, and those of us who aren't parents in the room, and teenagers and children, that the next generation is observing how we react to this. And this one may shock some of you. You may not even realize that this is going on, but in the world that I live in, we're extremely aware. This is a picture of an article that was run in the Houston Chronicle 7 years ago. The pictures that you see on the screen are men who were arrested in Southern Baptist churches because of sexual assault. And for years, the Protestant church has pointed the finger at the Catholic Church, but the Protestant church owes the Catholic Church a giant apology. Because for some of you in the room, the reason why you as a parent are really resistant to the idea of religious institutions is the hypocrisy in the institution of the church. And that hypocrisy runs even deeper, because you can watch a documentary on Hillsong, you can watch a documentary on the Duggar family and all that that's entailed. And if that's not enough for your children and you and I as parents to wrestle with, consider the number of mass shootings we've had in our country. And this one hit close to home for those of us who call ourselves people of the way, Jesus followers, because the last most notorious school shooting actually happened at a Christian school. And so this room is full of moms and dads who feel the weight of that. This room is full of teenagers and children. You are living in that. And there are parents who are going, how do I protect my kids from this onslaught? There are children we can't even comprehend the trauma, emotional, spiritual, intellectual trauma, physical trauma that the last several years have had on the next generation. It's part of the reason why I love your church so much, because you love the next generation so much. But the question that John wanted me to wrestle with you is this: what do our children need most from us as parents? In a time where we are hopefully leading our children in a way, and who knows what's coming next? I mean, we have hurricanes hitting California. Maui just burned up. Let's think about this. How do we effectively, moms and dads, lead our children in a way where they see Jesus in us? And here's what I would love to do if I could quickly. I want us to look, if you came in and this little coaster was on your seat, I would love for you to grab that and have it in your hand for just a second. And as you're grabbing it, I want us to look at this passage of Scripture. Jesus speaking to those who were closest around him at the time. He had just gotten word from John the Baptist. John the Baptist was arrested, was facing death. He was going to be beheaded. And John the Baptist sends word to Jesus, yo, are you the Messiah, or do we need to look for somebody else? And I love Jesus' response. If you get a chance, go and look the first part of Matthew chapter 11, because Matthew tells us that Jesus sends word back to John the Baptist and goes, just so you know, the lame are being healed, the dead are rising, people with leprosy are being healed. If there's going to be another, I don't know who's better. I'm him. He sends that message, and then he starts talking to those who are around him of what it means to be a Jesus follower. And he says these words before the verse that I look at here. He says, only the Son knows the Father, and only the Father knows the Son. And then he dives into this idea. To those who are listening, and we want to make this very parent-specific this morning. Here's what Jesus says to those who are listening, and 2,000 plus years later to you and I, as people who are trying to follow Jesus and lead our family in an effective way. Here's what he says. He says, come to me. Come to me. All of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens. There is not a mom and dad in some way, shape, or form who does not sit here this morning without some sort of heavy burden, and I know we're all tired. And Jesus says, watch this, come to me. Come to me. If you're weary, you have a heavy burden. You have got that him or her, that son or daughter, that thing that is pressing on you, that weight that you feel, that habit that they can't seem to kick, that issue at school, that friend thing. Come to me, moms and dads. Those of you that are weary, you're tired, and you're weighted down. And here's what's unbelievable. Jesus says, you come to me, I'll give you rest. Could we just do this quickly? I would love for everybody just inhale through your nose and just let it out. Isn't it amazing how your body feels when you just go, oh. I think that's kind of what Jesus is getting at. You come to me, take a deep breath, and rest. But he leaves us with this open-endedness. How in the world is coming to Jesus equated to rest? Well, he tells us. Here's what he tells us. He says, let me teach you. I want to teach you something, but the reason why I am someone that you can come to and get rest is because I am humble and gentle at heart. Here's a heads up for those of you that are a little more theologically astute. This is the only place that I've found, most biblical theologians have found, where Jesus actually says about himself, this is a character trait of mine. I am humble. Watch. Humility is connected to you having rest. The thing, moms and dads, the thing, teenagers, the thing, grandparents, aunties and uncles, the thing, follower of Jesus, that the next generation needs more than anything else from those of us who are leading them are humble parents. Humility, Jesus says, is the key to you and I resting. Now, here's what's interesting about the word that Matthew, that in the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 11, is used for humility. In the Greek, it's pronounced telephano, and tapano, and tapano is where we get the idea of lowly. It's a Greek word. It's where we get the idea of being low and reducing yourself. That's why we get that idea. The Oxford Dictionary takes it a step further, and it's like literally, laying prostrate on the ground. So here's the idea. So just getting as low as you can is the idea of humility. Now, here's the problem with that. In the 1960s, American Christians were looking at that idea, and this is what they were reasoning. In fact, the holiness movement in our country literally revolved around this idea of humility, because the idea was that you need to reduce yourself to the smallest entity so that you can walk in humility. To the degree that women were taught, look in the mirror and tell yourself that you're ugly. Or men, yes, you're skilled, but you can't do anything well. And it's interesting for those of you that care that the one, C.S. Lewis, is the one who pushed back against that idea. C.S. Lewis said this: by this method, thousands of humans have been brought to think that humility means pretty women trying to believe they are ugly and clever men trying to believe they are fools. And so what C.S. Lewis introduced to the world was a new definition of humility, one that many of us know, and that definition is simply this: that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking of yourself less. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's not looking in the mirror and thinking that you're less than. It's just thinking of yourself less. But here's what's interesting about this idea of humility in Matthew chapter 11. If you actually go and have a conversation with a Jewish rabbi would tell you this: that Jesus would have been studied in the Torah, and in the Torah, the idea of humility, or the word for humility, is anava. And every rabbi that I've spoken to has said this, that Jesus would not have thought about humility as in tapano. He would not have thought about reducing yourself. He would have been thinking, he probably would have said it in using the word anava. And what anava means, ladies and gentlemen, this is unbelievable. Anava means for you to occupy your God-given space in the world. For you and I to be humble means that we occupy our God-given space in the world. Now, everybody, get your coaster. Are you ready? This circle represents your life. And you have a choice to make, mom and dad. You have a choice to make, auntie and uncle. You have a choice to make, grandparent, faith leader. You have a choice to make. And the choice that you have to make is, will you occupy the space that God has given you? Because that's what it means to be humble. Here's what it means to be humble: for you to color to the edges of the space that God has given you. And my question to every parent in this room is simply this: are you occupying the space that God's given you? Well, what space are you talking about? Well, here's the space I'm talking about. If you're married in the room, your spouse, your space. Everybody okay? And by the way, men, that works both ways. You're her space too. Your spouse, your space. Your family, your space. Your children, your space. Small group leaders, your small group, your space. Are you occupying the space that God has given you? And every one of us in this room, you've been given some sort of space for you to occupy. And here's what I am learning, 30-something years, John mentioned this, 30-something years of doing this. What I'm learning about us as human beings is that there is something in us all the time that wants to color outside our space. And part of the reason why, in fact, the biggest part of the reason why Jesus could say, you occupy your God-given space in the world and only that, and you will find rest, is because most of us are absolutely worn out, weary, and heavy burdened because we keep trying to color outside our space. We keep trying to occupy space that isn't ours to occupy. That, by the way, is called pride. Now, some of that's natural. Some of that is you coloring over the edges a little bit, but it starts becoming a little unnatural. Well, give me an illustration. Check the back of your minivan and see what your stickers say about the honor roll. Everybody okay? Or where you vacation. Or where you eat. Isn't it interesting how we want to make sure everybody knows, I got a lot of space. I got a lot of space. And before you know it, you start occupying, and you and I are absolutely exhausted by trying to occupy space that isn't necessarily ours to occupy. And you're not at all hearing me say that that space is wrong. But here's what happens. We move from exercising, because here's the thing, your child's academic prowess, music prowess, athletic prowess, the fact that they're popular, those are all really, really, really good things. But if you're not careful, what we begin to do is that we become rabid for shopping and wanting to grab more space. And pride becomes arrogance. And let me show you what arrogance looks like. What arrogance looks like is you color your own space, and then you start coloring into other people's space. And the parents that I know in our country, some of you even in this room, this is a perfect illustration of why you're so exhausted. Because you're trying to occupy space that isn't yours to occupy. In fact, I made a list, and for some of us, this is going to sting a little bit, but that's okay. Your child following Jesus, not your space to occupy. You can set the example, but 30-something years of doing this, and I can promise you this, you think you can make that happen, not your space to occupy. Everybody okay? You are doing an unbelievable job setting the example, but you can't make that happen. You can't make life change or heart transformation happen. Watch this. You can't convict your child of sin. You may think, I can get them close. But conviction of sin, not your space to occupy. By the way, that's God's space. It's not your space to occupy. Not only conviction of sin, but an outcome of an event. Isn't it crazy, parents, how we want to use the church to manipulate our children to make a decision so they'll be better when they get back from camp? And have you ever had this experience? They come back and you're like, you're worse than when I sent you. Because we're trying to occupy space that isn't ours. What other people think of your child, not your space to occupy. Psst. What other people think of you as a parent, not your space to occupy. I shall continue. A.W. Tozer, the great theologian, his widow remarried after A.W. Tozer died. And she was asked one day, how's it going? How do you feel as a widow? And this is what she said. I've never been happier in my life. Aiden, her first husband, loved Jesus. But Leonard Odom, he loves me. Because there is something in us, if we're not careful, that we can so misunderstand what it means to follow Jesus, and we can miss the space, the people in our space that we are directly responsible for. And it's what leads me, I need to say this, and this is going to sting a little bit, and that's okay. But it leads me to help us to understand this idea. The idea that if we're not careful, we start thinking that success, our kids' success, is our space to occupy. It's not yours. In fact, if you're in this room, especially dads, as a dad like this, if you are trying to take credit for your son or daughter's athletic prowess, that's cosmic plagiarism. You're trying to take credit for something all you did was seed them. That's it. But your child's success athletically, academically, in the arts, not yours. Watch this. Adversity, your child going through adversity, not your space to occupy. Because here's the thing, that adversity is actually going to help them. Your space to walk with them, but not to save them from. I wrote another one down. Parenting someone else's teenager, not your space to occupy. Why would you want to do that anyway? Don't you have your hands full enough as it is? And this one is rampant with social media. You giving your opinion about everything, not our space to occupy. You do not have to answer every post that you see, that you disagree with. Not your space. But here's what happens if we're not careful. And as much as we're concerned with the sexual fluidity issue in our country, I need to say this because I care. Sir, that other woman who has a spouse is not your space to occupy. Ma'am, that husband of another woman is not your space to occupy. Perhaps we should be a little more concerned with the divorce rate than we are about sexual fluidity, because that would help. But what we do is we become arrogant. And then arrogance, if we're not careful, becomes entitlement. You think, and I begin to think, that all I have to do is to just grab more space. And here's the reality. Some of us in this room, the reason why you're exhausted is because you become entitled. And what's interesting, too, that I've found is that this idea of humility and space is that sometimes God naturally gives you more space, but if you're not careful, the more space that you get, you stop remembering the people that you are directly responsible for and directly responsible to. And it's your kids. And it's your spouse. And what they desperately need to see is a mother and a father who walks in humility. And it also means that I need to say this to you this morning. Occupying your God-given space in the world does not require you to reduce the space of somebody else. Because there are some of us in this room, this is what your space looks like. You have played, as a parent, the comparison trap for so long that you're just like, I don't measure up. And part of the reason you feel defeated is because somebody has come in and gobbled up your space. For a lot of us in the room, the reason why you feel defeated is that someone, maybe even you've reduced yourself. You've reduced yourself into thinking, I can't do this. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to do this. And so consequently, what winds up happening is we get to this place where we just want to throw our hands up and quit. Way too many of us measure our God-given space against the space of other people. And someone has wisely said that comparison is the thief of joy. And part of the reason some of us in this room as parents feel weighted down and weary is because you keep comparing yourself to somebody else and their space isn't yours. And I find it interesting that as we wrestle with all this, if you don't think that this idea of humility is important, Consider this, that Peter, someone who did life with Jesus, challenged Jesus' people to clothe yourself with humility toward one another. That I would decide to just stay in my lane. And I would decide to stay in my lane as it relates to you. And as it relates to you. And as it relates to you. And you toward me. That we would clothe ourselves with humility toward one another. Why? Because God opposes proud people. And for some of us, you can blame it on the devil, you can blame it on culture, you can blame it on the president, you can blame it on whomever you want to blame it on. But for some of us, the calamity that is happening in your family could simply be you're prideful. You're not content with just being you. But he gives favor to the humble. I'm going to leave you with this. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Adam Grant. He's a professor at Wharton College at Penn. And he made this statement, Joey, a couple months ago, and it literally, I stood up when I read it because it rattled me so much. And this will rattle some of you in the room. Here's what he said. Too many people spend their lives being dutiful descendants instead of good ancestors. I think about my parents. Both my parents are gone. Thought about that today. It's my first time to see y'all since Pastor Al passed away. And I've spent so much of my life wanting to make my parents proud. But this gutted me. Because Adam Grant's point is, too many of us want to make our parents proud instead of our children. He closed it by saying this. Maybe it's more important that you make your children proud than your parents. One of the things we're seeing with the next generation is that the next generation's faith is different than ours. In many ways, hold on, it's better. It's better. Our oldest son, our oldest is a son. And about a year ago, we were sitting having dinner, having a conversation, and forgive me if I've told you guys this before, but we were talking about the way of Jesus and what it means to follow Jesus. And it was not a tense conversation, but we definitely, as are most things in our family, we drop anchor and talk about deep stuff. And our son, who's probably smarter than all of us put together, he's just such a smart kid, thank God for his mom, looked at me and he goes, Dad, are you more concerned that I follow in the way of Jesus, or that the way that I follow Jesus looks like you? Looks like the way you do it. And I said, I hate your guts. Go talk to your mom. And then I think about our youngest daughter just finished her soccer career at the University of Florida, and right before she moved back to Atlanta, she was out walking her dog outside of her apartment complex. A ton of athletes live in that apartment complex right off campus. And as she's walking her dog, law enforcement officials and EMT are making their way around the apartment complex trying to get into an open door in the building. And Cameron rushes over and says, hey, can I help you guys? They were kind, but she said, I could tell they were serious. They were like, if you could let us in the building, that'd be incredible. She let him in her building, found out 15 minutes later that a University of Florida football player who lives just below her, the floor below hers, taking his life in his room. And as the story emerged of why this young man took his life, and out of respect, I want to make sure I don't tell too many details, but here's what it revolved around. He just didn't feel like he was making his family proud. So come to me. For all of us in this room who are absolutely worn out, carry heavy stuff today, and let me give you rest. Anava. Occupy your God-given space in the world. Because this isn't you. This is who I created you to be, Jesus says. Just color to the outside of the space. Color to the edges of your space. But quit trying to gobble up. And here's what we get. All I have to be is all I am. Mom, all you have to be is all you are. Dads, all you have to be is all you are. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, thank you for rest. Thank you for your example. Jesus, I think about the fact that how you modeled this. You were taken to the top of a hill and told, you jump from here and I'll give you all of it. And you, in essence, said, not my space to occupy. You wept in a garden and begged your dad to take your space away from you. But you occupied it anyway. You are our example of humility. Help us, Heavenly Father, to color to the edges. And thank you, Jesus, that you give us rest.